please welcome Black Youth Project 100's Ailith, Freedom for All America's Kasey Suffredini, and Catalina Velasquez of Consult Catalina. Leading the conversation, please welcome back the Atlantic's Emma Green.
So we've got one more conversation at today's program, and I personally am very excited to have this group with us for this final conversation of the day. We have a lot of really important issues to talk about, but I want to start by backing up a little bit. There's been a lot that's been discussed today in terms of culture and policy and law and Trump, but I want to ask you all how you've been feeling. What changed for you last week when a new reality in terms of the rhetoric in the country and the legal future for the country got crystallized? What have you been feeling?
I've been feeling heavy. It's been very tough as an undocumented transgender Latina to be at a time where I'm receiving over 150 emails, every week, families concerned that they no longer can take their children to school, that mass deportations are going to change their neighborhoods. I'm finding places to hide, right? A lot of questions, and questions that frankly make me nervous because I don't have the answers, right? I know the policy as it is today, but I don't know the policy as it's going to be day one with a lot of the very ambitious promises. What I do know is that I come from a resilient people, from a powerful people, and we're going to figure things out. But overall, it's been very heavy. I mean, the immigrant community has been hit very strongly. There's no surprise that this previous presidential campaign was rooted in anti-immigrant sentiments and the demonization of many of us. And so even conversations around criminality, right? Like folks are like, I don't know what that means. Some people don't know that places like Arizona, until not long ago, jaywalking will give you 3 misdemeanors that equated a felony. And that felony makes you a criminal. And so even the way we define criminality and the effects this will have on the trans community that is oftentimes relegated to survival sex work and working in underground economies. And so there's just a lot of connections. It's very heavy.
So I think building on that, and I want to hear your perspectives on this too, in what ways are the stakes different for transgender people? What is different and unique?
Well, I think there was, with the election, sort of a immediate overnight change from incredible policies that the Obama administration had put in place to protect transgender people. And now there is some of the fear and panic that I think the community is experiencing, and I'm personally experiencing as well, is partly in reaction to the uncertainty. It's hard to know where this administration actually stands. And at the same time, because of the way the campaign was run, some of the folks that are already being brought in, there's legitimacy for the fear, right, and some anticipation for what we're going to see. And it's really real. Like literally, people woke up on November 9th in the transgender community, and all over the internet where transgender people can come together, there's conversations about how can we support each other in if you haven't updated your documents and you want to, now is the time. We may lose the opportunity to do that at the federal level, and we may see reversals of things that will make us especially vulnerable if we haven't done that. So really, I would say in this moment, there's a lot of triage happening. It's not about policies. It's not even about what the strategy is going to be. It's sort of like how do we kind of triage until January 20th and do everything that we can to set ourselves up for the best possible success in terms of our personal survival come the new administration.
Well, Lorraine, some of your work at BYP 100 has been focused on trying to find the intersection between all of these different movements. So talk a little bit about that as a trans person, what it feels like to also try to work to bring unity behind different movements, especially now that we're in sort of a new reality.
So what I want to first say is, like what brought me to this work in racial justice and organizing with BYP 100 is, when you find yourself, I found myself as a trans-identified person. The first thing I did is I had this beautiful head of locks, dreadlocks, whatever y'all want to know it as. And I cut them off because I thought that the only way for me to conform, only way for me to be affirmed in my identity is to wear a wig, to wear straight hair. And then moving forward, I just started to experience more microaggressions that were linked and directly connected to anti-Blackness. And so I understood that my transness is intrinsically connected to anti-Blackness, and that my vision and my viewpoint from that is intrinsically connected to the historical oppression that we as Black people face. When you think about the Middle Passage coming over, being denied our names, being forced to being denied the ability to navigate our bodies the ways that we want to, that's a historical thing, and as a trans person, that's so directly linked, right? And so with BYP 100, we operate under a Black queer feminist lens, and that's directly connected to us understanding that Black liberation is understood as something where we uplift and center the folks that are living on the margins of the margins. I know people talk about intersectionality. Intersectionality is not just about people who just have the most oppression. This is not Oppression Olympics, but it's more about people. It's more about people with specific lived experiences, right, that can bring nuance and that can bring brilliance to the movement and the work that we're doing. And so what we think about is I think about it as a system of roots. If you cut a root and you like plant it, it grows a new system. And these new systems I think of as like anti-Blackness, right, directly connected to capitalism, directly connected to white supremacy, directly connected to patriarchy. And we cannot operate and try to attack one point and think that that's going to destroy everything, because the system will just reinvent itself in a new route. What we have to do is gather all of those roots, gather all of our peoples, and gather folks who are in the margins of the margins that are invisibilized and ignored, and figure out how can we destroy the root altogether. And so that's how we do this work. And with this impending Trump presidency, it's very important for us to work across movements, and to understand that that LGBTQ people are Black, are undocumented, are incarcerated. Like, we all have some type of interconnected. There's interconnectedness between our oppression, and being able to garner that and work through this movement in this time is what we're trying to focus on.
Yeah. Well, so something we were talking about backstage, there was an article that I worked on a while ago about women who didn't feel represented by Hillary Clinton. And I interviewed someone who works for BYP 100. And, she had some critical things to say. And Lorraine, backstage, you were saying, oh, well, we maybe can't say that anymore. So what you've been talking about is unity, trying to bring together all of these movements. But there's a real way in which this presidential loss for people who identify as being progressive or on the left kind of blends over difference or makes it less possible to have difference. So how are you and your organizations grappling with this question, which is how to have different viewpoints and not need to be in one uniform block with other people who are part of progressive or left movements?
I think we need to come into terms that we have a shared humanity, and oftentimes we forget that because of hyper-labelism. I'm part of the board of Trans United, and the legacy organization that came out of the Bernie Sanders campaign, our revolution. And something the way I show up in that space is welcome in its entirety. And what I mean by that is, as a woman, as a trans person, as an immigrant, people are understanding that all of these things are connected. Overall, I think that there is this absence due to hyper-specialization in other spaces, right? The conversation has been about marriage and employment protections. Well, if you don't have a job permit, why are we even talking about employment protections? I think that there's a lot of elements to foreign policy, right? And when you mention interviewing other folks who were not feeling represented under, the binary party system that we have, I would say, to me, foreign policy was huge. I am the product of the war on drugs. I am a product of Plan Colombia, right? That's why half of my family was kidnapped and persecuted in an over 50-year civil war in Colombia. That's what led for me to be here. And I think that as people living in this country, we need to make connections to the overall message of what does it mean to live in a place that is extremely militaristic and hawkish in its approach to interacting with the world. It's very imperialistic. And so I'm seeing, over 80 countries that criminalize people based on sexual orientation and gender identity, right? And by criminalizing, it's not just like, this is outlawed, it's we will put you in prison. You could have a death sentence just by being you, by walking in the heels of a trans goddess, right? And so I think that overall, we need to be able to be queer and trans and show up in foreign policy and show up in immigration and show up in racial justice. And so far, we've just been extremely segmented. Every given night, over 75 trans people are held in detention. Detention facilities that are privatized. Detention facilities that, because they don't know how to protect us from the alarming rates of sexual assault that people who are trans face in this space, we're putting administrative segregation, also known as solitary confinement, also, condemning the
Right.
Convention Against Torture.
Right.
And so there's a lot of elements that are missing.
So Kasey, your organization, Freedom for All Americans, works specifically on non-discrimination protections. And there's been debate within the LGBT advocacy community about what to do with the T, whether to push for protections for lesbian, gay, bisexual people in housing and hiring and public accommodations, and leave the bathroom stuff, the transgender stuff, which has become bathroom stuff, to the side. So how are you thinking about that as an organization, and what has been your perception of those debates about what to do with the T?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about the change in the world that this election has brought is that there are some elements of our strategy that actually aren't any different now than they were before the election. So one of those is knowing that this works. The last really high profile for all of the amazing work that happens. The high profile work of the last 10 years has been marriage work, right? And so that's a lot of people's frame of reference for how they compare this high profile work. And that was a really different fight. And part of the reason for that is the landscape, right? So when folks were working on marriage, the first state that we won was Massachusetts, a very blue state. Plenty of Republicans up there. They just call themselves Democrats. But it is technically a blue state. They at least call themselves Democrats. But the strategy was to win as many blue states as you could and to sort of build a climate that we could make a case for a Supreme Court win. The landscape for non-discrimination is totally different. We have won most of those blue states. We won them many years ago. We did it through strategies that mostly involved embedding gender identity as words in the statutes themselves, but not talking about what that meant, losing lots of opportunity to do public education. And so we're really working in red states to make the case for a federal law, not even really a Supreme Court decision, but we need a federal law. And obviously that's going to be a challenge with this administration, but that is the same challenge we have in the states around working with Republicans. And so our strategy before this election was we have to find a way to push Republicans. There are fair-minded Republicans out there. We have to find them and give them what they need to support us. And I wonder in this climate if there's almost an opportunity to get more of them because they want to distance themselves from this election cycle, from the folks who are taking over the White House. And so maybe that's our job, is to try to seize that, as hard as it may be for some of us as individuals who are much more progressive than the folks that we're negotiating with, right? So that's one thing. And the other piece is, a central thread of our strategy from before the election that will carry on, and I think will be even more important now and dovetails a lot with what you're both saying, is we have to educate Americans about who transgender people are. And we've got a lot of transgender poster children that are being pushed out, but the reality of who the community is and the depth of the community and the depth of the needs. I mean, non-discrimination protections, it's really like the tip of an iceberg, and there's so much more underneath in terms of what's needed. So really, using this opportunity to come together across different communities, really educate Americans about who transgender people are in all of our diversity.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just to add on to that,
Sure.
I just want to say, in conjunction with that and what you were speaking about, one of the things I wanted to uplift is that the LGBT community, right, has failed us, and the trans community has failed us because of the ways in which we were thinking about operating through a lens of palatability.
And say what you mean by that. What does
Right.
it mean?
So operating in a way like how. So when I think I'm a strategic communicator, and so I think about it in two ways. There's the easy way, in the way that we mainly do it, is how can we speak to the right people at the right time to say a message or to make sure that people who we need to move or people that we need to sway to our side can understand in the easiest terms possible. And so what can we say or what can we do to do that? The second one, which is the social justice form of communications, which I think is the most immoral form of communications, is how can we understand our community as a whole and create messaging and create images and create things that uplifts all of their experiences and speaks to support them and uplift them, and not specifically speak to the people that we're trying to move in a way that's going to make it comfortable for them. And so when we think about the recent movie Stonewall, like we failed Marsha P. Johnson and we failed Sylvia Rivera and we failed all the Black and brown, trans, and GNC people because we wanted to create a story that was palatable to the general public about what that history was.
Yeah, so that connects into something I've been thinking a lot about. I was in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, and there was a protest, as there have been in many places. One of the things that the people were shouting was racist, sexist, anti-gay, Donald Trump is KKK, right? This was one of the chants. And this, to me, was really powerful because I think it outlines a challenge for you all. If people in the community really do believe that Donald Trump, his administration, people who have supported him are racist, sexist, anti-gay, and putatively, connected to the Ku Klux Klan, that creates a challenge in terms of, do you try to talk with those people and work with them on legislation? Do you try to make your message palatable for them? So in this era of Trump, how are you all thinking through the question of working with Republican legislators, Trump supporters, people who are Republicans at this time?
I think it's imperative to see people as people. I think that we need to speak through difference. To me, conservatives, liberals, we're coming out of an administration that has deported a lot of people, right? And we're not going to ignore that. And it's the largest amount of people deported in the history of the United States. So I think that clearly neither is working. But what is happening is there's this massive levels of ignorance across all demographics about what we are and how we relate to one another. And I think that, bringing it back to bathrooms, right? It's not just bathrooms, right? I am a policy strategist, a political strategist, and something that I do is spin the media narrative, right? Because I do a lot of media relations. And something that keeps on reemerging is, oh, this is not just about my right to urinate. This is the fact that if someone asks me for a federal ID after the bathroom, I will get deported. This is about a bill that has clauses that prevent people from raising the minimum wage in the state, right? So it's a labor issue. This is about disability rights, right? And the fact that people in wheelchairs and who are differently able should have access to a restroom as well. This is about family, right? When did we start legislating when parents could take their children to a bathroom, right? My femininity has made me a target of violence all my life. And I know, and I'm very blessed to have a family that before they were deported 8 years ago, they will be attentive of me going to the bathroom, right? And I don't think it's okay to tell a father not to take his daughter to a bathroom, right? And so I think that even in conversations about things like the bathroom, there is an immigration lens, there is a racial lens, there is a disability lens. And I think we can no longer afford to act in silos. It's the 21st century. Changing demographics are inevitable. It's not supposed to be scary. It's supposed to be an opportunity for us to look at things from different lenses.
So Kasey, what have you been thinking about in terms of working with Republicans, Trump supporters, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need all the strategies. I don't think it's an either or. I think we need it all. It's when you look back on other successes and other victories that the LGBT community has had, that other social justice movements have had, you can't really say this was the one moment, this was the one strategy that won it. It's often many strategies, right? You think about all the work that the LGBT community did around military inclusion, right? Initial just gay military inclusion, not trans military inclusion, and the people who chain themselves to the White House fence, and and inside the movement, these discussions of, oh my gosh, the Obama administration is never going to talk to us anymore if you chain yourself. But we don't know. We don't know that the coverage of that kind of thing wasn't just exactly what was needed to just raise the level to another degree where we were getting more earned media and there was more. I mean, it's hard to know, right? And so I think our position at Freedom for All is this is how we're doing it. This is our role to play. But everybody has their part to play, and I think all those strategies are really necessary. And I think we're at a challenging moment where I think there is a large section of the community that's going to be really challenged by the idea of being in conversation with Republicans in this moment. And my personal philosophy on this is everybody is reachable. We've got to believe, and we're optimists. That's why we do this work. Everybody is reachable, and we all have different roles to play in reaching them. I think there's insider strategies, there's outsider strategies. We need them both. They work really well together.
Yeah. So we're going to take some audience questions in just a moment. So be thinking of those and be ready with your questions. Yeah, sure. And the other thing I'll add for you all to be thinking about while you add your comment, the last thing I'd like to close on for my questions at least, is thinking about things that you want to do differently or wish you could have done differently, or maybe regret looking back during this election cycle about being organizers. But Lure, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's actually going to go with that.
Great.
I'm actually not invested with speaking with Republicans or folks who voted for Trump and things like that. In this moment, though, I'm invested in what my people feel and what they need in this moment. And that's what BYP 100 is doing. We're taking a step back, right, and trying to figure out how do our people feel about this and what's going on. But what I will say, maybe they are reachable. This safety pin movement that's going on, I think that people have been like harping on that, right? But I think that's an opportunity to figure out which white people or which folks who feel some type of way, gather your cousins, right? Each of y'all with safety pins, come together, gather your cousins, and then you can speak to those people, right? And try to mobilize and try to organize. I think that for that, that's one of the most strategic opportunities that we can have in this moment. But for our folks, I think, is just figuring out where we are now, checking in, and then trying to understand where we can move forward working together.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, is I cannot forego the human right violations of today for an idealistic future. Meaning, I am willing to converse with different people. I did so when we pushed for the problematic SB 744, and we got it passed out of Judiciary Committee, and we got it championed in the Senate. I think that when people are given the opportunity to humanize an experience, and to be quite frank, less than 26% is it of people in the United States have interacted in a meaningful way with a trans person. It's about really putting a face to the issue. It's about really reaching out. I mean, I have given hugs to people that would never have dared to touch me, and really things have changed. I think that I believe it is an integrated approach, and there's no right answer. We need the outside strategy, we need the inside strategy. But as an undocumented immigrant, I need to stop deportation, so I'm going to converse with everybody.
Yeah. And Kasey, anything you would add?
Yeah, it's it's going to be interesting trying to figure out. You see, the original question was things that we might have done differently, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I would say personally, as a human being in the world, I probably would have been out doing GOTV election weekend, which I wasn't doing. It's one of the first cycles I didn't do that,
Get
and
out
now
the
I'm
vote,
ashamed
right?
of myself.
Yeah, get out the vote.
Get out the vote. Thanks. So there's that, but I also think we were really under attack last year already. I mean, we walked into this cycle already under attack. I think we knew that 2017 was going to be bad, even if we won the presidency. I mean, there's lots of things going on in the states that we couldn't change, and I actually think, given how much we're under attack, how much we're on defense talking about bathrooms, when what we really want to be talking about is dignity, not bathrooms. Although bathrooms play a big role in dignity, the problem is dignity, right? Respecting people, respecting that people know who they are and that they are who they say they are. And so going into 2017, I think we knew that we were already going to really be on defense. We'd already really been on defense. And really figuring out, I think we did a couple of good things in this cycle. We had a win in North Carolina. It looks like the North Carolina governor's going to lose, probably because of his anti-trans stance. That's actually really incredible in this moment. That's actually a pretty fast turnaround. It's pathetic compared to what we want, but it's a pretty fast turnaround for how public these issues have been. I mean, we've all been talking about them for decades, but they haven't been in the mainstream consciousness that long. So I think some things like that have been a good turnaround, trying to leverage that. We won transgender public accommodations in Massachusetts this last year. It's now going to be on the ballot. All the lawmakers that fought for that, some of them were attacked personally in their elections for supporting that. We were able to reelect them all. I mean, we did make, it's baby steps, but we're also, I think, at the very beginning, not at the very beginning of the trans movement work, but we're at the beginning of America actually paying attention to it.
Yeah.
And, it's baby steps, but it's something.
Yeah. Well, so on that note, who in the audience has a question? Down in the front, she'll bring the mic.
Hi, Will. I think this entire conference and particularly this panel has really clarified the stakes of the new political reality, and that is preventing violence. And Kasey, you mentioned that you believe that everyone is reachable, and I think this might be a way to do that. It's not about bathrooms. It's not about whatever. It's not a culture war. It's a threat to someone's physical safety.
And give us a question.
What do you is that something that you think is a good idea?
Yeah, I mean,
that was directed at you, but I think
Yeah.
that ultimately, it's about being expansive in what we mean by LGBTQ rights. I think that even this panel in itself, right? Like the other movements, immigration is LGBTQ liberation, right? And there's over 1 million immigrants that are not citizens, and until you're a citizen, you're deportable. And so there's just, there's a lot of elements that we need to play with regards to a narrative. Because we have to be expansive.
Yeah, and I'll take one last question from the group.
Hello. You may have answered this 12 times. I came in late. I'm sorry if it's redundant. But a big part of the reason Mr. Trump got elected was because of rural America. I work in rural policy. I'm just wondering, how can we help educate people in rural America about these issues and help bring people out of the shadows in rural America right now?
This is a great bow tie question, so no regrets
That is the
needed.
million-dollar question.
Yeah,
It's not about rural America, right? It is about people wanting change, right? And when we look at the exit polls and what people had to say is we want change. We want economic justice for all people, regardless of where in the United States you are. People are fed up of a two-party system that has not been serving them, and they voted for change.
do you all have final thoughts on rural America and how to reach those people?
I mean, I would just say quickly, like, we're transgender people, if we're just speaking about transgender people, right? Transgender people are part of the American fabric, and we have to figure out a way. We are struggling with economic justice issues too, right? We have to figure out a way to weave ourselves into that, not necessarily in a way that is palatable, but in a way that is authentic and that resonates with the folks that we're trying to engage. We share a lot of the same concerns, but we aren't seen as on the same side.
Yeah.
Oh, I just don't have thoughts right now. And I think it's okay to not. I'm working through it. We're working through it. And we'll figure it out. But I do.
Yeah, I think that is actually the bow tie finish to the bow tie question, which is that there's a lot of this that's unanswered. But thank you all for being here, and thank you all for listening.